Few men inside Nazi Germany posed a greater threat to Adolf Hitler than Hans Oster, and almost none did so from such close proximity to power. As a senior officer within the Abwehr, Germany's military intelligence service, Oster operated at the heart of the regime's strategic nervous system. He was not a dissident on the margins, nor a conspirator hiding in the shadows. He wore the uniform, attended briefings, signed documents, and participated in the daily machinery of the Nazi state. Yet from the moment Hitler consolidated power, Oster viewed the regime not as a patriotic cause, but as a criminal enterprise destined to destroy Germany. This conviction did not develop slowly. It was immediate and uncompromising. Oster believed that Hitler's war plans would bring catastrophic ruin and that loyalty to Germany required resistance against its own government. Unlike many who hesitated or waited for conditions to change, Oster chose action early. His position inside the Abwehr gave him access to invasion plans, diplomatic communications, and intelligence assessments that few others could see. What he did with that access would quietly undermine Hitler's strategy long before the war reached its most destructive phase. Oster's resistance was not ideological theater. It was operational. From his office in Berlin, he began feeding sensitive information to foreign governments, fully aware that discovery meant execution. In late 1939 and early 1940, as Germany prepared to strike westward, Oster repeatedly warned contacts in the Netherlands and Belgium of the coming invasion. He did so despite knowing that similar warnings had been ignored before, and despite the immense personal risk involved. His goal was not to guarantee Allied victory, but to force delay, confusion, and political resistance that might derail Hitler's momentum. At the same time, Oster worked internally to sabotage operations, obstruct directives, and weaken coordination wherever possible. He did not act alone. He was part of a small, fragile network within the Abwehr and the German military that believed Hitler must be removed, not negotiated with. These men did not possess mass support, nor did they control armies. What they had was access, timing, and moral certainty. Oster became one of their most active participants, using his rank as both shield and weapon. For years, his actions went undetected by the Gestapo, not because they were subtle, but because they occurred in places the regime trusted most. This was the dangerous paradox at the center of Nazi Germany. The men closest to power were often the last to be suspected. For Hans Oster, this invisibility would allow him to operate longer than most resistors ever could. As the war expanded, Oster's position became both more powerful and more precarious. The Abwehr operated in constant tension with the SS and the Gestapo, competing intelligence agencies that mistrusted one another deeply. This rivalry created blind spots that Oster exploited. While the Gestapo focused on hunting resistance among civilians and occupied populations, Oster worked quietly within military intelligence, where ideological loyalty was often assumed rather than tested. Under the leadership of Wilhelm Canaris, the Abwehr itself became an unusual institution inside the Nazi state, populated by officers who were skeptical of Hitler and hostile to the SS. Oster used this environment to push resistance further. He helped establish channels between military conspirators, diplomats, and foreign intelligence services, believing that Germany's only chance of survival lay in the removal of its leadership. These efforts were not abstract. Oster actively supported coup planning, including attempts to overthrow Hitler before the invasion of Poland and later during the early stages of the war. Each failure increased the danger. Each delay tightened the net. By 1942, the Gestapo's suspicions toward the Abwehr intensified. Failures at the front, unexpected Allied awareness of German plans, and internal rivalries prompted investigations. Oster's name surfaced repeatedly, though never with sufficient proof to justify arrest. He continued working, knowing that his protection was temporary. In 1943, that protection vanished. Oster was arrested, not for treason against Hitler, but for alleged financial misconduct connected to helping Jewish acquaintances escape Germany. The charge was convenient, allowing the regime to remove him without exposing the deeper rot within its intelligence services. Oster was dismissed from the Abwehr and placed under house arrest. Many believed his resistance career was over. In reality, it had simply changed form. From confinement, Oster maintained contact with conspirators and remained committed to removing Hitler even as Germany's military situation deteriorated rapidly. His belief that assassination was the only solution hardened with every report from the Eastern Front. While others hesitated, hoping for negotiation or collapse, Oster saw only escalation. For him, delay meant complicity. When the plot of July 20, 1944 took shape, Oster was no longer at the center, but his earlier work had helped make such plans conceivable. He had normalized the unthinkable inside the German officer corps that killing Hitler was not treason, but duty. The failure of the July 20th plot marked the end of any remaining illusions. Hitler survived, and the regime responded with ferocity. Investigations expanded retroactively, revisiting names long suspected but never proven. Oster's earlier arrest now worked against him. Evidence once considered insufficient was re-examined in the context of mass betrayal. He was transferred from house arrest to prison, then into the concentration camp system. Unlike many executed immediately, Oster was held, interrogated, and documented. The regime wanted records. It wanted confessions. It wanted to understand how resistance had penetrated so deeply into its own institutions. Oster offered little. He did not attempt to justify himself or deny his actions. Those who encountered him during imprisonment later described a man who appeared calm, even relieved. He had long accepted the likely outcome. What troubled him most was not his fate, but the failure to stop the war earlier. As Germany collapsed under Allied pressure, Oster remained imprisoned, fully aware that the end was approaching, yet uncertain whether he would live to see it. In April 1945, with Allied forces closing in, the regime began eliminating high-profile prisoners who symbolized internal betrayal. Oster was transferred to Flossenburg concentration camp, where several other conspirators were held. There, without formal trial, he was executed by hanging. His death occurred just weeks before Germany's surrender. It was a quiet killing, carried out in a system already disintegrating. No announcement followed. No acknowledgement was made. For the regime, Oster represented a dangerous truth it preferred to bury: that resistance had existed not only in opposition, but at the core of its own power structure. After the war, Oster's story emerged slowly, pieced together from testimonies, documents, and the accounts of those who survived. He was not universally celebrated. Some questioned his effectiveness. Others debated the ethics of espionage against one's own country. But over time, a clearer picture formed. Hans Oster had used the tools of the Nazi state against itself, not for glory, but out of conviction that obedience had become immoral. His resistance did not end the war, it did not save Germany, but it exposed the lie that the regime was unified and that loyalty to Hitler was absolute. In historical perspective, Hans Oster occupies an uncomfortable position. He does not fit neatly into categories of hero or traitor. He was a German officer who believed that his government was criminal and that resistance from within was the only responsible course. Unlike open rebels, Oster never abandoned his post. He remained inside the system, fully aware that this choice implicated him in its crimes even as he worked to undermine them. This moral ambiguity has shaped how historians interpret his actions. Oster did not command armies or deliver decisive blows. His sabotage was incremental, indirect, and often unsuccessful in immediate terms. Yet his importance lies precisely there. He demonstrated that resistance within a totalitarian state was possible even at its highest levels, though never without cost. His warnings to foreign governments failed to prevent invasion, but they exposed fractures in Nazi secrecy. His coup planning failed, but it laid groundwork for later conspiracies. His life shows how fragile and dangerous internal opposition truly was, and how close it came to extinguishment long before it could succeed. The legacy of Hans Oster forces a broader reckoning with responsibility inside authoritarian systems. He was not innocent. He was not untouched by the regime he served. But he refused to accept obedience as absolution. In a state built on fear, surveillance, and ideological conformity, Oster chose defiance masked as duty. That choice did not save him, and it did not stop the war. But it left a record that contradicts the idea that Nazi Germany functioned as a monolith. The most dangerous enemy Hitler faced was not always across the front lines. Sometimes it sat at a desk, signed reports, and quietly dismantled the machinery from within. Hans Oster paid for that defiance with his life, executed by the state he sought to prevent from destroying his country entirely. His story does not offer comfort or redemption. It offers something more unsettling: proof that resistance was possible, that choices existed, and that some men chose differently even when the outcome was almost certainly death. In that sense, Oster's life stands as one of the most disturbing and revealing stories of World War II. Not because it ended in victory, but because it exposes how close the regime came to being undone from the inside, and how brutally it responded when that truth could no longer be denied.